Stay with me, stay with me, stay with me. Yeah, okay, so I am now here and I am awake because I just found out while I came into the studio, oh my God, I haven't even put music into our things, so I couldn't play anything. And this was a song that normally I don't play, but I hope that you also enjoyed. Now I'm sitting here in the studio with Doug. Doug, how are you?
I'm really good. Thank you for inviting me to be here, Mark.
Yeah, very much. Your microphone again, please. Your microphone.
Yep.
Yeah, now you are loud and a wonderful voice. Yeah, it's so good that you're here.
Well, it's a delight to be here.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, it was Paula who introduced us, and it was so nice. So thank you very much, Paula Holmes. You are there in London.
Yeah, whether you're listening in or listening to the replay, thank you.
Maybe to the replay too. Maybe you are out for dinner, whatever. But there are so many people out there who are not out for dinner. They are sitting at home, wherever they are, in whatever country, and they are listening to us now. So what are you doing, Doug, as a profession?
Okay, well, I have what I guess most people would consider to be a really unusual profession, because what I do is the main part of my profession is that I'm a regression therapist. And regression is a branch of hypnotherapy, but it's also a therapy in its own right. And what I do is I get people to go, or I help people to go back to the source of whatever's going on in their life that's a problem for them at the moment.
Wow. Well, what kind of problems do they have when they come to see you?
Well, life problems, whether it's physical stuff, unexplained pain, whether it's emotional problems is a really common thing, problems in relationships, problems around money, fears, phobias, disturbing thoughts, sleep patterns that don't work very well, all sorts of things they come and see me for. Lots of normal everyday life things and lots of slightly odd things as well, and all are good.
Okay, and there are more men or women who are coming to see you?
I reckon about 90% of my client base is women.
Okay. Why do you think it is this way?
I think women are a lot more open to a couple of things. I think they're a lot more open to dealing with the issues that might be going on in their life. And sorry, you guys out there, I apologize if there are some of you that are a little bit more on it than others. But also, I think women have more of an all-embracing belief system around complementary therapies. I mean, I've done classes, I've done workshops, I've taught in different countries around the world, and I've attended classes and workshops myself.
Yes.
And I reckon probably we're talking about 10% guys most of the places that you go that I've been to in the past 15 years or so.
Okay, that's interesting. And nevertheless, there are also men who are interested in this kind of therapy style. Can we call it a therapy, or how can we call it?
You know what? I don't really like the word therapy, because I think a lot of people actually get scared off by the idea of doing therapy. I think there's a bit of stigma attached to it. I mean, it is referred to as a therapy. For me, it's, I don't even call myself a therapist. I call myself a practitioner. And, I don't really think of myself as doing therapy on people or doing therapy with people. I think of just helping people along the journey of life. And however that works with them, it is fine. I don't really sort of sit there in a chair and look austere as therapists might have done, or that might be the perception of therapists.
Wow. So we were talking about in the invitation today that I've sent out on Chiltern Boys Facebook, and also on my Facebook and your Facebook maybe too, and Instagram. We spoke about the story behind the story. What do you mean with that? Okay,
well, if you come to me, Mark, and I'm going to use you as an example and pull something out of the air. Yeah, and you tell me, and I know this isn't the case, but you come to me and you say, I've got a fear of flying. And I say, okay, how long has it been the case for? And you say, pretty much all of my life. And, I ask you the obvious question. I say, is there a particular incident that you remember in your life? And you say, absolutely not. What it means is that you can't explain that to me consciously. There's a story which is sitting somewhere in your subconscious mind that's the story behind this story. Now, what that could be is it could be an event at a very early age in your life that you don't quite remember, that you've either suppressed or repressed in some way, and you pushed it down into the subconscious. Maybe you were on a plane when you were a little baby. Maybe you got disturbed by a plane flying overhead, something relatively innocent. Or maybe, and this is where the juicy bit of regression comes along, maybe it's something that happened to you in a past life that's somewhere in your subconscious mind, and that's a story behind the story that we're trying to get out. Generally, it's not the surface symptoms.
Okay.
Generally, there's something a little bit more. And when we find out the original story, it's when we can release the current problem in the here and now.
Wow, that's interesting. And for example, this fear of flying could also be that we were listening to other people's story, and because of this, we were getting this fear on board.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, we kind of inherit fears and phobias in a way. That's one possible explanation for them. And sometimes we just look at the news and we see things on the news and we go, oh my God, it's really not safe. We digest information from every part of society. So whether it's external stories or whether it's internal stories really doesn't matter. The process is to help people release the story that's sitting there. That's, flying's actually the safest form of transport there is, as you probably know. Statistically, it's way up there. It's safer than getting on the bus.
Absolutely right. And is it necessary to first have a look at this life and the circumstances of this life with a client in regards to get the truth up, you see, in this kind of therapy or however we call it now, it doesn't matter, no?
It doesn't matter.
Do you first actually have a look at the actual circumstances the person is living in?
I'm always going to have a chat with somebody first, and before we start a session, we'll talk for about 20-30 minutes, however long it takes, because sometimes there's something blatantly obvious that's staring somebody in the face that is the source of whatever it is that's going on.
Wow.
But what I use most of the time when I'm working with people for regression is I use a little bit of hypnosis. I use a little bit of going into relaxation, and at some point the conscious mind is less present and the subconscious mind becomes more responsible for directing awareness, and we can get the subconscious mind to communicate where the problem is, whether it's current life or whether it's some other part of the timeline.
Yes. And when you sit there with a client, do you also have a look on physical reactions?
Yeah, I'm body language is a big part of, who we are and what we do. It's something like 83% of all communication, or it's a very big number. So I'm always looking to see when they react to certain words, when I ask certain questions, how their body language becomes or isn't, as the case may be. So it's, there's a lot of observation involved in the process. And
I'm a clairvoyant in my profession. You see, in this invitation today, I've written that you also were clairvoyant. Okay, this was a little misunderstanding, but nevertheless, I think you are clairvoyant, aren't you? I'm pretty good with things like that, to be honest with you. I can do readings for people. Nothing happens by accident, you see. Nothing happens by accident. Yeah, I truly believe that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, so that's right. And the way you actually look at people on the body language, for example, also has to do with psychology. Yeah. Yeah. It is a psychology. It's knowledge from psychology. I'm a firm believer that we have all of the answers within us, and if someone is sitting opposite you, observing you, and they're actually paying attention, then the client's going to tell me what's going on with them, whether they verbalize it, whether they do it through body language or just behavior or the patterns in their life. They're always going to communicate that to me in some way or another. The question is, have they worked it out for themselves, which is the most important bit, or how can I help them to understand it for themselves? Wonderful, that's great. And in increasing this awareness for you and for the client, does this already has an effect on them? Yeah, I think awareness is a big part of it. When we understand, the biggest step for a lot of people is actually admitting that they have a problem in their life. That's almost as though you're getting 50% of the way there by going, yes, I'm taking responsibility at this point, and I'm going to go and see somebody or talk to somebody or whatever I'm going to do about it. Yes. And then understanding a little bit more about the problem and understanding where it comes from, that it's not necessarily something that's their fault. It's just something that's happened in the great drama that we call life. Very good point. Very good point. And I think, to get rid of this drama, it's important first to have a look at the drama.
Exactly.
Yeah. Otherwise, you strictly come dancing or you can't dance. You see, it's the same. Maybe it's the same or something similar. I think we come back to this after these ads, and I play some music, and then we are back with you. Yeah, we are here in the studio, Chiltern Voice, tonight, the Marc Altmann Show with Doug Buckingham. He's from the Chiltern. You live in the Chiltern, sorry?
I live just up the road from Chesham. I'm in the Lee, so I'm...
Wonderful.
I'm on top of the hill somewhere.
This is really great. And here you are now on top of the radio station. That's great.
Your station, your voice. Chiltern Voice.
Yeah, and here we are again, Doug. What do you think about people who come to see you? For example, why is it so important to do past life regression?
It's not necessarily important to go specifically into past lives. We never quite know where we're going to go, whether it's childhood. Often I work with people for events that happen in the womb even. You know, we know scientifically that babies are actually aware of what's happening around them now. So sometimes things that throw people off balance have happened in the womb. And sometimes it's past life stuff. I never quite know where I'm going to go until people walk through the door. And that's kind of what makes the job it's not a job, it's a calling. It's kind of what makes the calling even more exciting, because you're not entirely sure of what you're about to do. But
and how did you get in contact with this kind of help style, helping people in this way?
Well, I, obviously as part of my own journey, I kind of had to go down this path, and I spent many years working behind a desk in the city, and going way back to about 1999, I started to get very dissatisfied with that lifestyle, and I started reading books about spiritual stuff. I started reading books about the connections between ancient civilizations and the similarities. And sooner or later, I got to the point where I thought, I just have to quit my job. And
what have you done?
I used to work in the shipping industry. So I was, servicing big clients and, helping other people make lots of money, which was very exciting at the time, I have to say.
Yeah, of course it is.
But I had a rush of blood to the head. I sold my house, sold my car, put my furniture into storage, and I went traveling for a couple of years. And while I was traveling, I kind of lost my old identity and started to find myself and who I was and what I wanted to do. And when I came back to the UK, I had this bizarre notion that I needed to get my chakras fixed. So I found my way to a place called the College of Psychic Studies in London.
So have you known already about spirituality and chakras before, while you were working in this other job?
Sort of. I was always interested in this area without ever actually being active. I'd happily go for a massage, I'd happily go for a Reiki session, I'd happily do a bit of yoga, I'd sort of talk a more holistic lifestyle, but not do very much about it. So, it was something that came very easily to me, and the concept of past lives was actually something that I never had to question. It was just something that I believed in, and I had no idea why I believed it, apart from the fact that I did. I remember watching, many years ago, there was a Barbra Streisand film called On a Clear Day You Can See Forever, and I remember watching it with my parents one rainy afternoon, and in the film, Barbra Streisand goes to a psychologist to quit smoking, and when she lies on the couch, she goes into a series of what are past lives. And for me, watching this as a kid, it was like, yeah, sure, that's what people do.
Wow.
So I didn't have to be convinced. But anyway, I'd never actually thought that it was a profession of any description. And one way or another, I kind of went to a place where I got my chakras fixed. I trained as a healer at the College of Psychic Studies. That was where I met our mutual friend Paula many years ago, I think 2004 or 2005. But I had a monkey on my back, and my monkey on my back was that I smoked. And I could stop smoking for about 3 months. I could stop smoking for 6 weeks, and something would get me back on the habit. And I count myself as a pretty strong-willed person, but I couldn't stop through willpower. So I saw an advert in my local gym for a hypnotherapist, stop smoking, and off I went. I went to see the hypnotherapist. I stopped smoking just like that. And I thought, how the heck did that happen? So I went off and I trained as a hypnotherapist. I did a short certificate course, and I did another course. But whilst I was doing that, and with all the work that I was doing, I was training in Reiki at the same time. Part of me opened up to spontaneous past life experiences, which I didn't even know what they were at the time. I couldn't put them into context, but I'd have memories which made no sense to me. I'd have really crazy dreams. And so at some point during my training, I read a book by a guy called Michael Newton, which was all about something called life between lives, how we plan our lives before we come into incarnation.
That's interesting.
And that,
yes.
As soon as I read that book, I had a shiver down my spine, and I said, that's what I'm going to do.
Wow.
That's what I'm going to do. And off I went and trained in regression.
And how do you think we plan our life before we incarnate into a physical body? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the fact that we are a soul that reincarnates time after time after time, and we come into this physicality, which is just a vehicle, and it's a vehicle where we work through our lessons, our learnings. We plan it in spirit as a soul, whatever word you want to use there, and it sounds slightly odd to a human where we experience good and bad, where we experience light and dark, where we experience polarity, but as a soul we come into existence to experience, whether it's good or whether it's bad, and that's slightly odd to a human. It's like, why would we want to experience
it's not
bad
odd to me,
things?
not odd to me at all.
It's not odd to you, but to most humans, it's why would you?
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of the fact that, lives don't necessarily go according to plan, but, before you and I came into these physical bodies, we had a bit of a roadmap of where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do.
Okay. And where do we get this roadmap from?
Well, we plan it in what I'm going to refer to as just a generic description of the spirit world. We much as you and I, well, we didn't plan this show at all, did we?
I don't even know what to say. Yeah.
Let's imagine that we spent an hour before the show planning, Mark,
yes,
and we sat down and said, okay, I'm going to play songs for 40 minutes, we're going to talk for another 40 minutes, and whatever. It's literally, we'll sit down with the souls that we incarnate with, we will sit down with the spirit guides that work with us, and we will decide what perhaps, and it won't be a precise roadmap, but perhaps somebody will be coming into a life to work on forgiveness, and they'll encounter different situations in their life that leads them into scenarios where they have to either forgive other people or where they have to be forgiven, as the case may be.
So this is a big topic there, yeah?
There's a huge topic there, yeah.
Yeah, and what is forgiveness from your perspective?
I'm a big fan of the fact that forgiveness is possibly one of the most powerful things that we have on the planet available to us today. It's the ability to let go of something that's happened. It's the ability to let go of the energy that we're holding in our physical bodies and in the cells of our body that we've been wronged in some way. It's really refusing, or not necessarily refusing, it's refraining or stopping blaming somebody externally for something that's happened to us and saying, okay, at some level I've played a part in this, I've created it in some way, and I'm able to let go of what's happened to me, what I perceive other people have done to me. I mean, Gandhi called forgiveness a bravery. He said to be able to truly forgive, you have to be very brave, and he was absolutely right, because it takes courage to say, okay, it was partly me. It was me who was creating that situation from a very subconscious level, but nonetheless, I played a part.
Yeah, and we now know 96% of our being is unconscious, and 4% is only conscious.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how can we get in contact with the 96% that is unconscious?
Well, we can look at what's happening in our life, for one reason, for one way of doing it. If you think about it, the unconscious mind does an excellent job a lot of the time. It keeps us breathing, it regulates our breathing, it pumps the blood around our body. It's the part that if we wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning thinking I need to go to the toilet, it's the part of our mind that's done that's rung the alarm bell. So it does a lot of really good things. But also, literally what it does, it holds on to programs, much like the hard drive on a computer. So maybe it has a program where a person is afraid of flying. Maybe it has a program where a person, when they get a bit upset, they reach for a packet of biscuits. Maybe it has a program of, every time I go into a relationship, I think it's going to fail. Whatever that program might be. And we get into the unconscious partly by looking at our life and saying, well, this isn't working very well. I'm still eating a packet of biscuits every third day, or whatever the pattern is. It's partly that, but also from my perspective, when people come to me, how do we get into the unconscious mind? It's hypnosis, it's relaxation, it's basically a slowing down of the brainwaves. What people don't realize about hypnosis is that we go into hypnosis about 20 times a day, absolute minimum. When we sit down in front of the TV and we sit there and we're not really paying attention to what we're watching, we've actually gone into a slightly hypnotic state. That's why advertisers pay good money to put their products on TV, because we're that bit more susceptible, because our brainwaves are relaxed and the subconscious mind is more present. When we're reading a book and we're fixated on that to the exclusion of anything else, we're in a slightly hypnotic state. Or more commonly these days, when we're looking at our phone and obsessed.
So has it to do with the fact that we actually focus on something very, very concentrated?
It's partly that. That's one way of explaining it. We focus on that, and we're less aware of peripheral distractions.
Yes. And do you know about alpha waves?
No. Sounds interesting, though, so tell me more. Because
I know when you go into a state of alpha, then...
Oh, sorry, alpha. Yeah, sorry. Sorry,
my German accent.
It's okay. It's literally, that's what we're doing. That's how we get into the unconscious. It's alpha, perhaps theta, brainwaves,
Okay, good. And what kind of state, what kind of level I have to be in when I want to get to know my mindsets, for example?
I suspect with you, Mark, probably you'll be able to access that quite easily.
I know. But I have to ask all these questions, otherwise we can't.
Of course you do.
One
of the biggest problems that we as human beings have is thinking. We overthink, and when we're trying to overthink, it's a little bit like if you certainly the way I do it. If I put my car keys somewhere in the house and I forget where I leave my car keys, if I try to think where I've put them, then it takes me quite a long time to find them. But if I stop thinking about it and go and do something else, then the idea will pop into my head of, oh, they're there, and I'll be able to find them much more quickly. And
so there's something in front of the truth or the thought of reality, where we can find it then.
Basically if we stop overthinking, then life becomes a lot easier, because we're actually listening rather than putting barriers in the way.
And then there's also another topic I think is quite interesting. This is also my topic, and I'm interested what you think about this. I'm over feeling. I get so much input sometimes on an emotional level that I might explode if I was not to know that it wasn't me.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of clients for issues like this, and we take in energy, we take in emotions, we take in thoughts. We are at heart, and this is a foundation of the work that I do. We're at heart, we're energetic beings. We are an electromagnetic energy field, which means we attract other people's electromagnetic energy with a consciousness. So, by the very nature of that, and I'm not about to talk science because I'm not a scientist, but scientifically it says that we're going to attract things from other people unless we put up some kind of barrier around us or some kind of boundary to stop taking in all of that stuff. So I meet a lot of people who say that to me, taking in, and classic examples of when we get on public transport and you can go and stand next to somebody and you realize that they've had a really bad day. And it feels as though you're kind of drinking it in from them. Or, when you're doing one-to-one work, I know you do a lot of one-to-one work, and you sit opposite people and you're probably going, okay, well, it's quite useful for your work to guide you to know what to say to people, but also you don't want to be taking it home with you at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely right. Nevertheless, what I found out myself, there's always a certain kind of trigger in me where I adopt it with a certain kind of neediness or kind of not feeling good in this situation, or it reminds me of something from the past, from childhood or whatever, and then I'm much more open to take it in. Otherwise I would leave it in the outer sphere, and there I read it then. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I can't remember what word you just used. I call it a trigger. or a hook. There's a hook in me that will allow me to connect with that person, whether I like it or not. There's a resonance, I guess, is an even better word.
Yeah, it's a resonance, that's right. And I think it becomes toxic when you think it's you, or you are this feeling. And it becomes healthy, I feel, when you find out where your trigger is and you work on this trigger, this mindset, why you think you should actually take this on board. And then you can find new self-awareness. And also the feeling for yourself is growing then, or for myself is growing then.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, a question that I always ask myself in these scenarios is this mine?
Yes.
And that's a great place to start. And after that, you can start to follow a little trail of working out what the energy is that you've
and
you're
this
feeling.
trial already can put you so much in bondage that this already drains you even more.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that there are certain kind of mouse traps that we all go into, and the more we become aware of these mouse traps, then we don't lose ourselves anymore.
Yes, and that's it. It's that classic poem of I walk down the street and I fall down a hole. I walk down the street the next day and I fall down the same hole. I walk down the street on the third day and I know the hole's there, but I still fall down it. And I walk down the street on the fourth day and I try and walk around the hole, but the next thing I know, I'm inside it. And on the fifth day, I go down a different street.
That's interesting. You see, it's so simple in the end of the day, but if you are not aware of that, then simplicity is not the key.
Yeah,
then it's becoming a drama.
Yeah.
And where do you see this with past lives, Doug?
Well, I think that a lot of what comes out of past lives is basically unfinished business. If I gave you an example, let's call past lives, let's call them books instead. And let's say you've been 100 books, Mark, yeah?
Okay.
And probably, 65, 70 of your books are finished. They're satisfactorily concluded and they're sitting up on the bookshelf, they're gathering dust. But the remaining 30, I had to think about my maths there. The remaining 30 are sitting around on the floor in varying degrees of completion. So they're still ticking away in your subconscious.
Wow.
And maybe there's an emotional reason why they weren't completed. Maybe there's some thoughts going on from that past life experience. Maybe there's a physical issue that's been carried over. The energy is still flowing into your subconscious. And that's, emotions, of course, are a big part of who we are, and emotions are always connected to thoughts. And, science understands that emotions are also connected to physical stuff now as well. So the three things go very much in tandem.
But that's really amazing. I never have had this comparison with unfinished books, you see, but I think it's perfect. Absolutely nice. Okay, we'll be back after the ads. Stay there. You are listening to our show, The Marc Altmann Show, with Doug Buckingham and me.
Chiltern Voice, your brand new community station.
This is Chiltern Voice.
And this is Paul van Dyk. Let go. And I think we all have to let go. Yeah, maybe we have to let go of the unfinished books that Doug talks about. We will find out more in about 3 minutes.
Chiltern Voice, your station, your
Chiltern
voice.
Your brand new community station.
Yeah, this is Chiltern Voice, and this is Marc Altmann, the Marc Altmann Show tonight here on Chiltern Voice. And my guest tonight is Doug Buckingham, and he's sitting just in front of me, and he is an amazing person, a fascinating person, who talks about past lives today. So what else can we talk about? You have written a book, I've seen, yeah? Gifts for Your Soul.
Yep, the book came out about just over a year ago. So the book is, it's not the Past Life book. That book is coming. That's the third in line. This is the first book you've got in front of you there, Mark, Gifts for Your Soul. And it's literally what it says on the cover. It's simple healing techniques for everyday use. And part of my, part of why I do what I do is that we can actually use things in our daily life. Much as we get up in the morning and we brush our teeth and we go to the toilet, and that's very beneficial for our physical health. It's what can we do energy-wise to actually help us, whether it's meditation, whether it's a little bit of reflection, whatever it might be. And that's what that book is a summary of. It's a book of simple energy techniques, which, people who have been walking in this world for a while may know quite a lot of them, but there's some quite good reminders in there as well. So it's
wonderful.
Just a little gift.
And I think we all need something for our daily life in regards to spirituality, because that's why I'm writing my blog, for example, for people to read something about those things, to integrate it much more into their own very life.
Yeah, absolutely. And what sort of things are you writing on your blog?
Easy topics. It's about forgiveness, or it's about virtues. Virtues are very important, I feel, because in our societies nowadays, virtues are not that common anymore.
I agree with you. Yeah.
And therefore, I think it's important to place them in a way where people can also take it.
Yeah, it's how to make things acceptable, how to make things accessible as well, and how people can do it in bite-sized chunks rather than a kind of having to take on a whole new lifestyle. How do we integrate properly?
Yes, absolutely right. By the way, we have listened to the news 2 days ago, and there was this fire in Notre Dame in France. Yeah, have you heard of it?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
How do you see it in spiritual terms? Because I have my opinion, I guess, coming later.
Oh, fascinating. You caught me really on the hop there, because I haven't really thought about it. I very rarely watch the news, actually, but some things flash into my awareness, and this was one of them. I think there's a lot of old energy tied up in that building, and I think it probably need to be cleared. On the human face of it, it's a tragedy, because it was a beautiful old building, but there's a lot of despair that went into that building. There's a lot of old stuff, and fire is a very good cleansing way. So energetically, I think it's okay. As a humanist who actually likes nice architecture, I think it's quite sad. But
yes, very much. Yeah, same for me. Yeah, but I think this is a very interesting answer, because what I found amazing is how people are so attached to these outer things. You see, instead of understanding that God is everywhere, anywhere. You see, not only in churches, not at home. You can have God on the loop everywhere.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And frankly, some of the tragedies we see in the rest of the news where people are dying are actually more valid than a building. I agree. We can always build another building. Okay, and this one was so special. Old, it was beautiful, but terrible things are still happening to people, and that's less acceptable.
And what I found amazing then was that so many people donated money afterwards. You see, 500 million or even more than 500 million euros, I think, were coming in 2 days. But for people who are starving, you see, or refugees, nobody really gives them money there. But for a church, they do. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and who's actually receiving that 500 million pounds or dollars or euros or whatever? Is it going to people who have money already, I would say?
It's a very good point, I think. Yeah. And then there was also Chanel actually donating a lot of money, but I think they need maybe a nice cover for their pictures and the spots where they can take pictures of their models, you see. Huh?
You're probably right there, yeah.
Okay, those were the things that came to my mind, you see, while I was watching.
Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. And I've been into this church several times, because I'm in Paris a lot, and I speak French, like German, or English maybe, and therefore I've been always to this place, and I like this place. But nevertheless, I think fire is a symbolic. We can't really we can't deny it anymore. I think also Christianity can be rebuilt or renewed.
Yes, everything has to be renewed. If we look outside of the window and see what the trees do every year, where they grow leaves, they shed leaves, there's a cycle of life.
Our apartment or flat, you see, also needs renovated sometimes. No?
Exactly.
We need new wallpapers, and after 20 years, I think it's all a bit rotten.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yes, that's okay. Very interesting, no? Okay, let's go back to past lives. When you think about, for example, this church, okay, also has to do with past lives, because there were so many people working on this church, for example, 800 years ago, when it was built the first time, I think it was in 1200 something, or 1169. Yes, there was a foundation of it. Those people and those souls who worked on this church, for example, let's say there was a church, are they back again?
Well, they could well be. Yeah, they could well be. Who knows for sure? I've worked with people who've been aware of, one of the problems that people have with past lives and the truth of past lives is that they say that, oh, everybody was Cleopatra or everybody was someone famous, and that's rarely the case, to be honest with you. You do, and I have had famous people come along, but mostly it's people who are the builders or the road sweepers or whatever it might be, the farmers and the farmers' wives, and everything that goes with it.
Yes.
Years ago, probably about 10 years ago, I had a client who was actually a vicar from a certain church in London that I'm not going to name, and that vicar came along, and I was quite surprised that he came along in the first place, but and that was interesting in itself. However, he said to me, I have a strange connection with this church. I don't know what it is, but I'm convinced I was here before. And anyway, we went through the regression, and of course, he was there before. He'd been there 400 years earlier, and what he'd found out was that some relics had actually been buried underneath that particular church, and it's not not hugely valuable stuff, but it was culturally important. And actually what happened was that 6 months later they actually renovated the church in the current life, and they were able to find these relics that he'd seen in the regression and to preserve them. So often we reincarnate in a similar place, in a similar scenario. There are patterns that we live through, much as there are patterns in our current life where we walk down the street and we fall down the hole. We often repeat patterns in our past lives.
Yeah, I had Erdogan Haraldsson here in the show. You know him from Iceland, and he worked with Elisabeth Kubler-Ross on past lives, and he also did studies in Sri Lanka with children who said, "Oh, I was my mom is not. You are not my mom. My mom's somewhere else." So this was a very interesting show.
I mean, this is one of the closest things that we have to evidence about the reality of past lives. There was a lot of research was done in the 60s by a guy called Dr. Ian Stevenson, who came along and he had a grant from the people who invented the Xerox machine to go out and investigate reincarnation, and he looked at 2,600 cases of children that were suggested to be in genuine reincarnations. And so, the beauty about children's stories is that they haven't been influenced by the media. They haven't been influenced by, what they've read about at school, because you don't read about this stuff at school. You don't see it in the media. So he was taking, very much innocent young people's stories, which were spontaneous. And I've come across loads of people who've heard stories from their kids where they've said, "Oh, you're not my mum," or I remember growing up in Scotland, or whatever it was, where it's come out purely spontaneously. Because what happens with kids is they get it conditioned out of them over time, and they're told not to be so silly, or they're told, don't make stuff like that up, or whatever it might be.
That's interesting.
And there's lots of stories out there. If you go on YouTube, you can find all sorts of interesting stories that have been factually proved to be correct. There's a lovely one by a boy who was in the woke up having nightmares, and he was about 3 years old, and his nightmare was little man can't get out, little man can't get out. And anyway, to cut a very long story short, what they discovered was that he believed he'd been a pilot in the American Second World War, and he, as a kid, he was building, or he was playing with models of American fighter pilots from the Second World War, and he knew what were the fuel tanks, what were the bombs, where the different bits of the aeroplanes were. And what happened was his story became so convincing that even his father, who was a fundamentalist Christian and didn't believe in this stuff, ended up investigating it, and they actually found the warship that he'd been on a particular day when he died.
Wow.
There were lots of really interesting things about this story, but one of the things that he said, and bear in mind he was still a kid, he painted a picture. And he painted a picture of him, and he was called James Houston III. And he was being met by 4 other people, and I can't remember their names, but we'll call them Bob, Trevor, John, and Kevin.
Yes.
And his mother or his father, whoever, said, "Who are these 4 other people?" And he said, "Well, they're the people who met me when I went to heaven." And when they looked at the records from this fighter pilot that had died, it turned out that John, Bob, Trevor, and Kevin had been in his squadron and had died a week or 10 days earlier. So there was actually a foundation, in fact, for the stories this little kid was coming out on all sorts of levels. It was, and this one is called Soul Survivor on YouTube, and it's a fascinating story. This stuff from kids is amazing.
Wonderful. Doug Buckingham, thank you so much for being here. And now we are closing the first hour and we go to the news, and then we have just another hour. Isn't it amazing? I think it will be filled with loads and loads of lovely insight with you and I. Thank you very much for being here, Doug.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Mark.
Wonderful.
Chiltern Voice, your brand new community station. This is Chiltern Voice.
Yes, here's Chiltern Voice, and now we play a song. Because it's important to touch the sky. Here we are. And here we are again. And Doug, I think it is more than what we think it is, you see, because what I found out when I only talk to you now while we have had the ads and the news, and it's important to understand that there is this topic is integrated into a much bigger scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. I think humanity is evolving, and I think recognizing that evolution, and obviously recognizing that evolution is important. Obviously part of that is the fact that technology is evolving at a fast pace.
Yes, technology is evolving too. That's right.
Yeah. But we are adapting hugely. I see a lot of people who are not responding anymore to conventional medicine, who aren't getting the results they need from conventional medicine. And if you look around the state of the world and you look at the health systems in most countries, they're a mess these days. They're grossly underfunded, and they're unable to cope with the problems that people have. And what's happening at the same time is there's a huge rise in complementary medicines, and for me that's no accident. The fact that people are looking around and they're going, okay, well, how can I help myself, is really part of the human evolutionary process, in my opinion. And within that, what is it? It's what we talked about earlier. It's awareness. It's awareness that we are somehow creating what's going on with us, and we can actually do something about it rather than sort of being victims in our life. We actually can start to create and change things, which is massive for humanity.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely right. Yes. And what do you think about evolution in itself? When we think about evolution, the church, for example, says there's a creator out there. He has created the earth, you see, and after 7 days he went back to heaven and left us here. So what do you think about this?
I think it's I think it's a belief that if people believe in that, then I have no problem with that. I think I'm a big fan of everybody's belief system is good for them, and I never decry anybody else's belief system, but my own belief system is that we are creators. We can change our lives. And yes, I believe that there's a universe out there that's a benevolent universe that we can work with. However, we're really the main creator within our own life. We don't need to give away our responsibility, although we are very much helped. There is assistance all around us. If you go back 500 years ago, people would, their only route to God was talk through a priest. We've evolved. Whoops, sorry.
This was your headphone.
Yeah, watch my headphones. Yeah. We've evolved beyond that now. We meditate, we pray, we don't, if you look at the attendances at churches, they're way down on what they were even 50 years ago, let alone longer ago. So, we are recognizing the fact that there's a lot more out there in the universe, but also we are an integral part of that. We're not merely minions, if you like. We co-create, I think, is probably the phrase that I'm looking for.
But if we create, if we are the creation itself, and we create ourselves and we create our life, why can't we say that we also are part of God?
Why can't we see that?
Or why can't we say it? Or why can't we understand us being little gods here in the physical body who are capable to create
Yeah.
create, co-creation.
Exactly. Well, I don't know why we can't do that. I think it's partly because we're programmed against it. Centuries of of subjugation, if you like. And if you look at what's the word we come down to? It's power, isn't it?
Yes.
If we recognise that our power to change, to create, to all of those marvelous words is with us rather than somewhere else, then we can do something about it. Yeah.
Yes.
But we've been programmed over millennia, over generations, through our ancestral line, all of those things that we don't have power.
Yes, and when we talk about past lives and how our story behind the story is influencing our now, can we also see it in these terms? In regards to creation and that we are in the process of evolution to become much more aware that we are creating?
Yes, I'm a big fan of the fact that for me, past life ties in a bigger picture, because if you look at every great religion and philosophy, one thing that they say is be in the present moment. And if you look at one of the leading figures in the New Age movement, Eckhart Tolle says, live in the now. Yes. That theme runs through every great religion and philosophy for all time. And what that means is, don't give away your power to the past or to the future. Now, in the context of past lives, we've all, and this is my opinion, we've all had past lives where we've lost our power. So when we go back and we experience those past lives and we release the effect that they're having on our current life, we're re-energizing ourselves. We're able to change the patterns that we've been running for a lifetime and for the past 5 years or 10 years or whatever it might be. We're taking back our power. We're living in the present moment. We're becoming part of that creative process. I had a client earlier this week who came and she said, well, since the last session, she said, I have had all these strange things happening to me. And I said, okay, tell me more, because I like to hear about strange things.
Of course.
Yeah? And she says, well, it seems as though, I've been wondering, and she lives in London, and she said, I've had 4 separate occasions that I can think about where I've been thinking about old friends, and I've literally bumped into them within half a day. Or they've contacted me spontaneously. And I said, well, what does that mean to you? She said, well, somehow I'm creating this. How am I doing it? And I said, well, you kind of always be able to do it. But what happened in the last regression session was that we cleared a few blocks that were preventing you from being able to do that and to subconsciously communicate with them. So,
and did she understand it?
Yeah, she did.
Wonderful, very good. And I think it's the same for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, we're clearing it. This is my belief, is that a lot of us are in incarnation today to clear out our wardrobes, our metaphorical wardrobes of the past life. So we're clearing all of that clutter, we're clearing all of that old baggage, all of that unfinished business, so that actually we can start to live in a different way. I think this is part of the journey for humanity as a group, or aspects of humanity. We've got to get rid of that stuff. We've got to realize that we are able to live differently. And if you look around the world, we're still living the same pattern of the past 2,500 years. We're still fighting wars over needless things. We're still saying, this is my land, this is your land, this is my land. We're still getting into squabbles about that. We're still fighting about money. We're still doing
the moon,
yeah, exactly. We're still having these ridiculous conflicts which seem so important, but it's still the same patterns that are continuing. We have to change.
And do you think nowadays, in political terms, it's the same?
Yeah, I think if you look on the TV, I think it's probably reached ridiculous levels now. It's comical, it's childlike what's happening on the TV in the House of Commons and wherever else. It's never been that nourishing in our lifetime, but it's positively ridiculous now. I'd say.
But nevertheless, maybe it becomes much more obvious now. Yeah.
Yeah,
obvious, I think in a way, the truth is something else.
Yeah, I think there's no place to hide for all of this stuff now, and I think that's part of what's been happening over the past 5 or 10 years especially. I think a lot of things, because if you look at the power of the internet is a great thing in many ways. You can't keep anything quiet. So all of the stuff that's been lurking beneath the surface, or people have tried to say we're not doing that's come into the light in some way. And so
suppression doesn't work anymore.
Suppression doesn't work anymore, and it's the same. I think that's happening for humanity as a whole, but it's also the same individually. That's more people are saying, well, what I've suppressed in that past life, actually I have to work with now, or I have to come and see a clairvoyant, or I have to go and see a healer, or I have to go and do a Reiki course, or whatever that way out may be, or that way out of releasing the suppression. It's we have to change, and the individual is reflecting the whole.
And therefore it becomes obvious that it's not clever to go into the drama of what happens, but stepping out of it and having a proper look at it, isn't it?
Yeah. Sometimes you have to re-experience the drama in order to be able to release it. You gain that understanding, but it shouldn't be dwelling in it. It's just a quick visit just to understand, and then you let it go, yeah?
And how do we cope with our guilt feelings while we go through this process? Because the more the ego comes up in people, that's what I experience with people, the more guilt is coming up. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done this, I should have been a better person, I should have been whatever, should. What do you think about that?
Well, I think guilt is one of the most toxic emotions we have around, and what we talked about 20 minutes ago or half an hour ago, forgiveness is one of the biggest solutions for guilt. It's certainly something that I work with when I'm working with people, but there's generally a reason for the guilt. There's generally a source of the guilt, and that's sometimes, if I sometimes I get a lot of emotional stuff with clients. So clients will come along and say, okay, I've got a problem with this emotion, and guilt is a common one. So what we'll find is there'll be a start of that pattern of guilt. Whether it's current life, whether it's past life, doesn't really matter. But there'll be a start of that pattern where the client has become open to it. So we can start to work around that and start to resolve that.
Yes, and I think I can add, I think there's a certain kind of a reasonable guilt, but there's a toxic guilt. And this reasonable guilt, it has to do with the fact that society wants to work. It has to fit. We have to fit into a certain kind of society level. The toxic guilt is becoming stuck.
Yeah, it's when we don't process.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't process. Very good point. Yes.
Because for me, the word emotion is energy in motion. So these things have to flow. They have to be released. We can't hold on. So, when emotions get stuck, that's toxicity.
Toxicity, absolutely right. And how do you explain to your clients that this toxic guilt doesn't work anymore?
Well, they have to work that out for themselves by experience. And that little, a lot of the stuff that comes up in sessions is, they have an experience, and we talk about the experience at the end of the session so they can gain an understanding of it. And most of the time they get it. Sometimes they need a little clarification, but most of the time they'll understand.
And do they find it a bit strange that you are a person who does not judge them? Who do not judge them? You do not?
I think people like it. They like the fact that I don't judge them. They do find it unusual because
unusual, I think so. It's unusual.
I had somebody who had a let's say they had a, mostly when people go into past lives, they're victims and they have something done to them. But occasionally I have perpetrators, which takes a little bit more courage.
Have been perpetrators too.
Sure,
of
we've
course.
all been perpetrators, but it actually takes a bit more courage to get into it.
Okay.
And
I had a look at this myself.
And I had to explain to a lady. I said, I don't care what you did. So it means nothing to me. It's just a past life. And she was like, but I did something quite unpleasant. I'm like, sure, we all did.
I also have heard from therapists who brought people to past life experiences, and then they found out that they have done something wrong, and then but the therapist hasn't said, oh, it's okay. No, for example, she lived with this guilt feeling for 2 years until I came across, and said, sorry, no, this was only past life regression, nothing but this.
Yeah.
And your action actually now has nothing to do with this anymore.
Yeah, well, that should have been processed a lot better. That's all I can say about that.
What do you think about karma in these terms?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, just going back to that last comment, a very important thing to say is the story is over. That story is over.
Very good point. Very good point. Okay, that story is over, and after the ads, we go back to maybe karma. Yeah?
Good
karma
subject.
Is great. Okay, good subject. Stay there.
This is Chiltern Voice.
Hello. Yeah, here we are again. And karma. What do you think about karma, Doug?
I think the word karma is just a really interesting subject. Sometimes people have misconceptions about it, and they think that karma is an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth type justice. And there was a show on TV that I don't watch much TV, but about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a show called My Name is Earl, and in it, the guy was he was a low-key criminal, and he'd done a lot of bad things in his life. And at some point, he got hit by a car, and he won the lottery in the same day. So he decided that he was going to use the money to put wrong all of the rights that he'd done. So he made a big list of 100 people or whatever, and that was the show. It was him putting right the wrongs that he'd done in his life, and that was what he called karma, paying his karma. And I think there is a lot of misconceptions that karma is exactly that. I tend to think of it slightly differently, and I think that we're predisposed, as souls, we're predisposed to certain energy. So, for example, if let's take the energy of robbing banks, let's say you would incarnate perhaps as the bank manager. In the next life, you'd incarnate as the bank robber. In the next life, you'd incarnate as the bystander. So you'd get to experience all aspects of the energy of robbing banks. Yeah, and I'm using a silly example with robbing banks, but you get my point.
Not maybe robbing banks, but all about banking.
Yeah, banking, or maybe the emotions that go with it, the whole emotions of robbery, and perhaps the guilt that goes with it if you're the bank manager who loses people's money, or whatever it might be. So as karma, we're predisposed. Karma for me is a predisposition to certain situations, to certain energy that is probably incomplete from the last time. We're almost like we're magnetically drawn to certain situations, sometimes certain people who will trigger these things in us, certain emotional triggers, certain psychological triggers, whatever it might be. So that's, for me, that's karma. It's and what we're trying to do within that is to get balance.
Like the weather forecast tells us. Weather is always balancing, you see. There's a high, there's a low, and there's rain and the sun again. And
that's true. The climate is balanced in some way, isn't it?
Yeah, all wants to balance out. So karma is like the weather forecast, maybe. Yeah. Maybe.
Great example. I love it.
Yes. And sometimes it's really windy and stormy, and sometimes it's nice and sunny, and we need sunscreen then. Don't forget that.
Yeah, exactly.
We can also create our karma. So we have created this all ourselves.
Yes, as souls we're choosing this. As human beings, sometimes that seems absolutely crazy. Why would you? But as souls, we're choosing it as the experience. We're choosing to be the bank robber. We're choosing to be the bank manager, whatever it is. And all of the emotional possibilities that go with it.
Or the clairvoyant.
Yeah. Or the clairvoyant, And, that would be fascinating with you. Why have you chosen to be the clairvoyant in this life? Is it something that you've done in other lives? You may have an idea of that, I don't know. But,
I think it is already gained in other lives on a certain level, but nevertheless, everything comes with a certain kind of price, you see. Yeah. Because as a clairvoyant, it's there's so many people in society who think, oh, he's a bit dodgy or whatever, a bit strange guy. Yeah? Of course, I'm not, because for me it's complete normal. But everyone can project their own stuff onto me.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, a lot of life is projection, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, of course. And then it's up to me how I cope with that.
Yeah.
And how do you cope with other people in your profession there?
I'm
in these terms, like critics or criticism, or you shouldn't do what you're doing.
I'm not really attached to it. For me, it's one of the greatest lessons of my life is there's a book called The Four Agreements by a guy called Don Miguel Ruiz, and one of the 4 agreements is never take anything personally, because other people's opinions are other people's stuff.
Yes.
And I wholeheartedly believe that and live that as much as possible. It's nothing to do with me, whatever. If I walk down the street and somebody calls me an idiot, that's nothing to do with me whatsoever.
Yes, it's wonderful. Very good example. Yeah. And I think for you, our listener, it's also important to have a look at this yourself, because whoever you are and whatever you're doing, first have a look if the other one maybe has an issue with you and it's not even yours.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very well said.
Yeah, so I think we all have we are all here to have a certain kind of experience delivered, and we also give challenges for others, you see, and only being present. Me walking down the street also has an effect on others, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize this. Wonderful. Okay, I play a song now, and then we're back.
I should have walked away.
Yeah, now, like Doug Buckingham here in the studio tonight with me, Marc Altmann. In the Marc Altmann Show, you are listening to Chiltern Voice. What do you think, and we spoke about karma now, yeah, and what do you think about the fact that everything builds up on the past?
Everything builds up on the past. Yeah, I mean, absolutely is the first word that I say to that. It's, to understand why a political climate is as it is today, you have to look at a history book.
Yes.
To understand how we are today, you have to look at our own history. So, it's very much, my whole thought pattern is very much about clearing our history. So, not so that it didn't happen, but so it no longer has a pull on us, which is not taking us in the direction, or taking us in the direction that we don't want to go. So, clearing our history, clearing our past is, And
why does this past tries to keep us so much in the past instead of being in the now?
Because it's unfinished.
Unfinished, or is it a habit, or?
Well, it can become a habit, but basically it originates from being unfinished. If you think about post-traumatic stress disorder, what happens there if, let's take a soldier who's been in a war situation, what will happen is that certain sounds, maybe a loud bang, will trigger them to suddenly get some form of flashback that makes them believe, whether it's for a split second or for longer, that they're still in a war situation. So they undergo the trauma. And what's happened there is what's happened within the brain is that the brain hasn't processed it properly. We've got these 2 points of the brain, one of which is the amygdala, which is involved in our emotional processing, and one of which is the hippocampus, which puts things into context in time and space, i.e. that they're finished. So what's happened there probably is that the hippocampus hasn't properly processed the original event. So the bang suggests to the client that it's still going on. And this happens in all sorts of patterns and habits and behaviors and emotional situations. It's still continuing. So, I meet people... So
the situation in our now triggers something in our inner from the past.
Yes.
If it's from yesterday or from 10 years ago or from past lives.
Exactly.
That's where we can have a look at it, yeah?
Yeah. And I meet loads of people who come for relationship issues and they say, this guy's done this, or this has happened with this guy. And it's, I remember a couple of years ago I had a woman who came and said, I dated the same guy for the past 10 years. He's had a different face each year, but he's exactly the same guy. What is happening here? And of course, this is just going back. She's literally, you could say in a karmic way, she's literally going back through all of these guys because that original guy who did come from a past life wasn't finished. It wasn't processed. She'd been left at the altar in that particular case. So can we say this guy from the past life with a certain kind of psychology structure inside, or how can we say? Well, literally, it was an emotional thing because she'd been left at the altar in that past life, so she was still looking for a guy to treat her badly. Yeah, that was what the expectation, the belief, the psychological process, whatever you want to call it.
Yes,
that's what was going on subconsciously, of course.
Okay, but do you think it's really personal that you have met this kind of soul or a soul group or a certain kind of behavior, or is it always really a personal thing?
Not always, no. I think sometimes it can be more of a collective type of consciousness. Mainly the reasons why people come is obviously their own personal life isn't working out, but I think everything that we do affects the collective consciousness. Every little wardrobe that we clean out affects the whole in a really positive way.
So. And do you know how it does affect it? Because I've heard this several times, but I can to imagine how it does.
I believe that as souls, we come into incarnation from a soul group. That soul group may be anywhere between, using random numbers, 6 and 24 people. So what we will do as a soul, and we might do that in our dreams, is we'll communicate with that soul group what's happening, what we're doing, what we're clearing.
Okay.
We might do it at the end of our lives when we go back and we reconnect with that soul group. So it's almost as though we're doing work for a community. It's going to be, there's going to be a ripple effect throughout that community. So if we go back to our fear of flying example, and the soul who's experienced the fear of flying and overcome it in this life goes back, and that works for the soul group as a whole now. So it's often how it can be.
Yeah, and is there also a reason, from your perspective, why we forget who we are when we live here on this planet?
I think it would be overwhelming to remember everything. I always remember reading many years ago those Neil Donald Walsh books, Conversations with God.
Yes.
And in
classics.
It was the second or the third book, and Neil Donald Walsh turns around to God and says, "Have I had past lives?" And God says, "Yes." And then he says, "Well, how many?" And God says, and there's a pause, and he says, "Well, 356 or whatever the number was." And could you imagine even partially remembering 356 past lives? It would be overwhelming in the conscious mind. We simply wouldn't be able to cope with it.
So that's why it's always a reset when we are reborn again. A reset, free brain, or how can we call it?
You could call it a reset. You could call it the veil of amnesia. I've heard of it referred to. But remember, all of this stuff is still sitting in the subconscious. It's just consciously.
So it's there. It's not finished. It's not deleted somewhere. It's
not deleted.
in the physical body, in the brain. Yeah.
Think of it like the hard drive on a computer. You've got all of these programs which are running your computer on the hard drive, and occasionally when you want to type a Word document, you have something in the RAM memory, the immediate memory.
Yes.
Otherwise, everything that's functional and controlling many functions is sitting deep down there until you need it. And of course, what may happen is you might look at your computer when you've had it for 2 years and you go, "God, well, I'm not using that. Why is that still there? Why is that taking up 3 gigabytes of memory," or whatever it's doing?
Yes.
So you delete it. And, our consciousness is a little bit like that. We have stuff sitting there that we don't use anymore. We have stuff sitting there that's causing our computer to run slowly. We have stuff that's, that's spyware or malware or whatever the heck it might be. We have all of those variants there. Generally we're working okay, but, we could actually run a bit better.
Wonderful. That's interesting. So it's not about that we really forget it. We are not getting it.
We're not conscious of it.
We're
not actively conscious of it. And of course, what may happen, people say, do I need to go and see a past life therapist to experience a past life? And the answer is not necessarily, because sometimes we have strange dreams, which may be past lives. Sometimes we if we're relaxing in the bath or something, we may drift into, a small part of a past life situation. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of a therapeutic session. We get random memories that make no sense. Sometimes, and I personally experience this, I go to places, Cornwall is a big thing for me, where I literally have memories activated that I don't know from this life. I know how to navigate around Cornwall, and I've never been there very often, but I know how to get from town to town. I know the towns, I know where certain things are in the town. So I clearly, for me, that means I have something below the level of consciousness, which in my explanation is a past life, that allows me to know Cornwall.
Yes.
So, we're always ticking away. Something is going on in our consciousness that's guiding us. And I think of past lives as often pushing you in certain directions and sometimes pulling you in other directions, and sometimes that's really healthy. Sometimes it's less healthy.
Yes.
The trick is to go, okay, well, life's not quite working as it should be at the moment.
Yeah.
Do I need to do something about it?
And what I also experience is that the parts of my soul, of one soul, you can say, is incarnated in a physical body, and there are other parts who are incarnated in other bodies. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it. Yeah, living parallel lives.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a well-known belief. How might you be aware of that is my question to you. Are you aware of other aspects of your soul in other bodies?
I think not at the moment, you see.
Okay.
But there are so many people who think they were whatever, let's say Napoleon or whatever. It can't be the truth that everyone was Napoleon, for example.
No, I mean, this is a real common thing, as I mentioned earlier, for people disputing past lives.
Yes.
I read somewhere that, and I'm going back probably about 8 or 9 years, that 11,000 people have been regressed to the life of Mary Magdalene. I've had 2 of them. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was fascinating. But the 2 that I'd had basically cried their eyes out for about 2 hours, and they cried their eyes out over a lost love. So there was a resonance with the story of Mary Magdalene and their own personal story, which was also about a lost love. So, you could say archetypally.
So it's also archetypal, but it's also projection, maybe, yeah?
Projection, archetypal. How I always work with people is there a remission of the symptoms after the session, or, a few days after the session? Do you feel better? Is the sadness that's been overcoming you in those 2 particular cases, has that reduced in some way? And the answer in both cases was yes. So by connecting with that life, whether it was theirs or not,
yes.
And we could argue that until the cows come home and never know the truth.
Yes.
Doesn't really matter because the symptoms got better. And this is a common thing about past lives. Are they real? And does it matter if they're real? There's many possible explanations. The archetypal resonance of Napoleon or Mary Magdalene is the subconscious mind making up a story. Is it ancestral memory? Is it somehow encoded into our DNA? Is it cryptomnesia, where we remember the story from a book we read 10 years ago or a film we saw 5 years ago and we put it together as a past life?
Yes.
And what I can say is all of those things are absolutely true. I've seen them all happen before me. But the reality is your life changing as a result of connecting with that story? I've worked with, people don't have to believe in past lives for it to be effective. I've worked with lots of atheists, and what I say to them is, look, don't care about whether you can find the story in the history book. Don't care about whether it's your story. The reality is there's a story in your subconscious that we're going to find out that's not doing you any good. So what we're going to do is we're going to find that story and we're going to release the power that story has
Perfect.
in you
I like
in some
that.
way.
Yeah, very much.
Don't worry about reading about it in Google.
Yeah.
It's not important. What's important is that your story changes now.
And that's the reason why I'm convinced. That's why the film industry is so successful, because in watching movies, we immediately go to past life memories, like as a pirate, or Pirate of the Caribbean, or Middle Age, everything. Huh?
Yep.
Yeah, and nowadays, magic movies are very successful, like Harry Potter was, or also other movies, and I think it has to do with the fact that we want to remember that we are magical, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, those particular movies have touched an enormous amount of people and, were tremendous, I think, culturally.
Yes.
But yes, archetypally, they're touching us in some way, or personally they're touching us in some way. And that's the whole point of film and books,
Wonderful. So we go to the ads and then we are back again. Stay there. Yeah, and here we are again, and I think it is time to talk about, what do you think it's talk about now? What do we want to talk about?
What have we got left? I think we've talked about so many things.
Yeah, but we still have 17 minutes.
I think
it's great, I like
the role of spirituality in people's everyday lives and how that can be normalized.
I like that, yes. Why do you think normalized? A very interesting word for that.
Because I think that there's still a perception out there that spirituality is a bit odd, that people expect you to be wearing flowing robes or
hippie,
have a long fluffy beard or whatever it might be.
I don't, by the way.
No, I don't either. Yeah, but anyway, So I think there's a perception in some circles that it's still a bit odd because, the reality is people fear things they don't understand properly. So they project their fears and their expectations onto people. But the reality is, what is spirituality? It's a belief. I say it's a belief system that there is something more than us, and whether that belief system is God, whether it's the universe, whether it's a soul, whatever line you choose to walk down, it's a belief system that we are not simply this physical being that's sitting on a chair or lying on a bed or walking down the street or whatever it's doing. That there's something more about us. That for me is a spirituality, or it might be the belief that there's a spirit of nature. But there's, again, that's a something more theory. So, how do
higher power, we can say.
Yeah, higher power.
Yeah.
That's a great, nice way of saying it.
Yeah, and I think in mentioning higher power, I call it God, okay, but then you can also understand that for a higher power, you can also, you take responsibility for your own very life, but there are some aspects you can't do, and you leave it up to God.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, co-creation. Yeah,
co-creation. No? I do the co-creation. He does, or God does, or she does the big creation, and I'm enveloped by this creator, right? Why do you think people have a toxic connection to a higher power?
I think. I'm going to say the same reason I've said to you all night from experiences of the past. Yeah, there's some kind of disappointment, there's some kind of experience, there's some way in which their expectations were dashed. And so there's a toxicity about it, there's a negativity about it, whatever you want to call it.
And is this also a part of the evolution?
I think, part of human evolution, I think this is a really interesting point, is that we have to trust. We have to trust. What we've realized, if you look around the world, is that we can't trust the government. We can't trust the health service to look after us properly. We can't trust institutions where 50 years ago, our parents, grandparents, whatever, probably would have done. So we have to trust something else.
Or religions, maybe.
That just popped into my head at the same time it came into yours. So what do we trust? We have to trust ourselves. That's hard for people. Yeah, we have to trust a higher power. Perhaps it's a little bit easier for some people. There's a belief system that their angel will find them a parking space, or their guardian angel will look after them while they sleep. Whatever that belief system is, there's an element of trust coming into it. And I think that's crucial for human evolution. We have to start to place trust in something which is let's call it abstract, if you like. Let's call it energetic. Let's call it spiritual. But it's something which we can't see. Yeah, or most of us can't see.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting, because what we're doing at that point, we're saying, okay, we're human beings who have 5 working senses for most of us. Actually, we're going into the point where we're investing in the fact that we're multi-sensory beings, that we can sense something more than just our physical senses. We're clairvoyant, we're clairsentient, and all of us are all of these things. We just haven't perhaps acknowledged it yet. We're claircognizant, and it's investing in our energy, our trust in that there's something more, and that we are capable of something more. And I think that's hugely important and really interesting.
If we all had basic trust, wouldn't there be less confusion in the world?
Less conflict.
Less conflict. No? Because without basic trust, we think there's always something missing, or?
Yeah. And what is there if we don't have trust? Then we're suspicious of other people and their motives. We're suspicious of other situations. And we walk into a situation, whatever that situation is, with a negative expectation.
Yes.
That something bad is going to happen.
But I would say we shouldn't be that naive. Naivety is something that might not help, and maybe people mix this with basic trust, but it's not basic trust itself. It is something else. Now, what is naivety for you in these terms?
I think I'm going to say I'm a little bit of a fan of a naivety, because I think naivety is a childlike innocence. And I think one of the problems with adult life is that we've lost our childlike innocence. We fear things that we don't understand, whereas a child will automatically tend to embrace things, or at least be open to stuff, and that's one of the problems with adults. We've bought into the stories from the media, we've bought into our parents' stories, we've bought into whatever story it is, and we've lost some of our naivety. And I think there's naivety can mean stupidity on occasions.
But no, I don't mean the stupidity there. I mean, for example, when you have a look at court cases, most of the people who do crime, they come there with a kind of naivety. They do criminal things with money or whatever, but they don't even think about this themselves. You see, so naivety also is an entrance for confusion in these terms.
Yes, agreed.
On other levels, on a relationship level maybe, or on a one-to-one level, it's very powerful. But I think it's all about how do we use it, and where do we use it for, or what do we use it for.
Yeah,
I think so.
I mean, you could also say, if someone is naive around relationships and they get into a series of bad relationships, what happens probably at some point, they stop getting into relationships and they say, okay, I'm not going to leave these four walls. Yeah. Which is, ultimately, that becomes a negative thing. So, yeah.
No? But nevertheless, for me, for example, I haven't had a relationship for years now, but I think it was healthy for me because I had to recover. Still to recover on a certain level for not to lose myself in someone else, you see. And I think it's and it would be naive to think doesn't matter, I can do it again and again and again. Then we have this past life memory again, you see, which hasn't been addressed.
Yes, and that's it. When we keep on repeating and repeating, then there's something deeper. Yeah.
And I think also a lot of our listeners, they first, whenever you are alone at home, you first have to really find yourself. And when you're in contact with yourself, then it's much easier to have a partner and a relationship. Yes. I think so.
And that's the key. If you need things from another person, then you're always going to be in trouble in a relationship. Yes. But when you're able to sustain yourself and generate genuine self-love, then relationships are a lot easier.
I have always lost myself in someone else, in others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's also a quality, but if the other one can't appreciate this, this then becomes a problem.
Yes, absolutely. And it probably means you attract the wrong type of person. They might appear to be fabulous at first, but after a while, that becomes hard.
Yeah, hard because there's no stability.
Yeah.
So we all need stability. So from our past life regression, what kind of stability do we get when we finish the unfinished business?
Well, there are two main reasons for past life regression. One is we clear our stuff. And whatever that stuff is, the fear of flying, the bad relationship pattern, the whatever it is, we clear our patterns. So our life will it will change as a result of that. But the second thing that we often get from past life regression is the fact that we're connecting more deeply with our soul. Now, whether that's something that we have awareness of in our everyday life depends on the person. But we are really, that connection with something more than ourselves can change our lives. If you look at medically, people who have near-death experiences, there's a huge statistic of people who've experienced this in America. I think it's like 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, but it's a big number of people. And what happens, they have that near-death experience where they leave their body, where they go out of their body, perhaps they meet their relatives who've already passed, perhaps they see a white light, whatever it is, and then they come back into their body and they resume life. Now, what's happened, what's been documented by people like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Raymond Moody is that their lives change. They have a greater appreciation for life. They have the quality of their life improves, and it can be the same with regression, because we're experiencing that there's something more. And if you think about it, how we are in today's life, medically, we're set up to extend life as long as possible. You know, even when people are critically ill and they have all sorts of things about their body no longer functioning, we generate an enormous amount of resources into keeping people alive for as long as possible, which is kind of like a fear of death. But if we put a fraction of those...
fear of death, you're right, I never thought of it, Okay.
But if we put a fraction of those resources... into trying to understand that there's something beyond death, that there's something more to life than what we see in our physicality, we might not be so damned afraid.
Yeah,
you know, we might actually enjoy our lives that we have a little bit more without carrying this fear of illness around the illness itself.
I feel the entire system is still based on fear. The commercial system, economy, everything is based on fear, no? Because if you would not fear having something, not having something, then you wouldn't go for it.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's so much fear which is portrayed. You know, you could argue that this is the whole basis of the media. This is why we rarely see good news stories in the media, because there's an energy of fear that's generated, and when people are living in fear, then heck, they're a lot easier to control.
Yes, they are. But what I can't understand in general is that there are not that many people who see through this illusion. Why is it so?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think people like an easy life, Mark. I think, you know, because they don't like to take responsibility. Because actually, when you start to say, okay, well, somehow I'm creating this, somehow I have, you know, I have the ability to change this, then actually you have to take responsibility. That can be hard.
And responsibility sounds very negative for people? Or?
Well, I think people like to live a carefree life as much as possible and have an easy life.
Careful life.
Or carefree.
Carefree. Carefree. Yeah, but carefree, I think, to me it would be not carefree, for example, no? If I wouldn't face my fears and turn them into love or whatever we call it, or higher power, I think it's much more stressful to live the drama.
I agree with you. Yeah. Completely. But I don't think that's the popular perception. Yeah. I think it's easier to carry on as you are. You know, when you make change, you know, it can be hard for people.
Where can people find you?
People can find me on my website, which is www.dougbuckingham.com, and you can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Doug Buckingham Solutions for the Mind, Body and Soul. You can find me on Instagram, Doug_Buckingham. You can probably find me on a few other places on social media that I can't remember, but the website, dougbuckingham.com, is the easiest way, and there's an email address, there's a phone number on there, and you're very welcome to contact me with your questions.
It's wonderful. Yeah, and I think I hope, but I also feel that people are inspired by what you said today, and what can you give people as a last sentence or so tonight for to have a good sleep?
I think whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever your situation is, start to invest in a belief that change is possible. Change is always possible, and that you are capable of making that change for yourself. And I have a little saying which I put at the end of my monthly newsletter that I send out, is that it doesn't matter about the size of the steps that you take, so long as they're in the right direction. So whatever you're going to do, make a small change. If you need to make big changes in your life, start off small, and it's okay.
Wonderful.
You'll get there. You will get there.
Thank you so much, Doug. Doug Buckingham has been here tonight in our studio, Chiltern Voice, the Marc Altmann Show. My name is Marc Altmann, and I want to tell you, I also learned again something tonight, you see. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mark. It's been an absolute joy to be here. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and you have a good sleep now, and I have another show. When is my next show? When is my next show? I think next month, or not this month. It's Easter. Wait, I have a look. I'm not very well prepared, you see. So the next show will be In May, the 8th of May. 8th of May, and there will be Stuart Pearce here in the studio, and you will really like it. You will love it, I'm sure. Okay, so good night for now, and thank you very much for having been here, our listeners, and good night, Doug. Good night.
Good night from me as well. Sleep well.
Wonderful. Bye-bye.
Your local community radio station, Chiltern Voice.